Hey, Papa Bear. Papa Bear, Papa. I like that he always has sound effects that goes with him moving that around. All right.
Come on, focus. Focus. Dang it. It's not focusing. Can we do the whole thing?
Welcome to That's a Reach podcast, where we sit down to talk through questions about the Bible, theology, the gospel, and more, and how they influence your everyday life. You may have had these questions yourself, so we hope you find this conversation encouraging and clarifying in your pursuit of Jesus.
Hey everyone, welcome to episode 19 of That's a Reach podcast. My name is Bert Ollinghouse, and I'm here with Pastor Matt and Pastor Taylor. How are you guys doing?
Doing well.
Good.
Yeah.
Okay.
Ready for, what episode is this?
19.
Episode 19. Yeah. We've been going for a while. Right, Josh, behind the camera? Right.
Okay, well, let's get into it. Question number 1. As Reach continues to grow and our friendships begin to deepen within the community, how do we navigate smaller friend groups forming while trying not to leave anyone feeling left out? For context, not every get-together can be 8 to 12 people. Sometimes it's just hanging out with 3 to 4 friends, but then others can be upset that they weren't invited. How do we manage building these closer friendships without feeling like we are leaving out those other friends who are still within the bigger friend group?
Yeah, I think there's a couple aspects to this. One is I always like to tell people whenever there's any kind of like interpersonal conflict or relationship issue, the question is like, what is your end of it, really? And so it's like, okay, if we're in this situation where somebody feels left out, my question for them is kind of almost like the entitlement of it. It's like, hey, listen, it's okay to not be invited to something, not be invited to everything. It's okay for other people to have relationships and build relationships without you being present all the time. That's natural. I think if you're getting upset that you weren't invited to something, you need to kind of do your own soul searching. You know, like what? Maybe it's fear of missing out. Maybe it's just plain old self-centeredness. You know, like whatever it is. You know, you need to kind of take a seat and say, okay, it's okay for me to not be invited to something, you know. But then there's the other end, right, which is to the person, kind of the person who's maybe inviting people or whatever. Yeah, absolutely. There is no obligation to invite everybody to everything. It's okay to have friend groups. It's okay for you to be closer to someone than other people. But the question is kind of interesting because there's almost like this implication that there's like the options are like we have a 3 to 4 get-together, or we have like an 8 to 12 get-together. And so if that's your options, then yeah, it's fine to have a smaller friend group. That's totally okay. At the same time, you know, is it that you have a group of 3 to 4 and there's one other person that kind of fits into that friend group that you just didn't want to invite? Maybe you need to check your heart. You need to check like, and part of that is maybe being kind to somebody in that setting is more important than having only your 3 best friends over. You know, not letting somebody feel left out. Yeah. You know, so you kind of have to just, I would really tell everybody involved to look at themselves in that situation. Like look at your own side of it and say, am I really, like maybe I'm being selfish by not inviting that one more person. Yeah. You know, and then also maybe it's totally fine for me to have 3 of my best friends over and not invite 8 other people, you know? Yeah. Yes.
That's the whole thing, you know, it's just a part of transition into adulthood, because when you're in high school, your normal rings of people are kind of set by what you're doing.
Yes.
School classes, extracurricular activities, whatever. And so you didn't have to make those choices beforehand. But now when you step into adulthood, one, you have to realize that now you have to be discerning and intentional with that while considering other people's feelings, because that is difficult. You don't have to consider other people's feelings when I go to this class and you go to that class. Sorry, bro. That's just what class you're in. Yeah. You know, like you don't have to consider those feelings, but now when there is activities going on, you do have to consider feelings. And like Taylor said, there is a level of selfishness that we need to overcome in that. But then also, if you're the person that's feeling left out, like me, I don't sports at all. Like when the guys get together and they want to talk about anything sports related, I don't feel bad. Like there's some part of me where it's like, man, I wish I did, but I really don't. Like, don't invite me.
Yeah.
It's fine. And so we need to just realize, I have different friends for different things.
Yeah.
When Taylor and I want to talk about video games and he wants to tell me about Fallout 6,
Far Cry.
Far Cry 6, not Fallout. That was recently. But Far Cry 6, we play games together. AJ and I don't talk about video games.
Right.
But Taylor and I do, because we have that thing in common, and that's okay. It doesn't make, me and AJ less friends because of that. And we need to just kind of grow into being okay with that. But then, like you're saying, also be intentional with not leaving out somebody. Like if I haven't seen so-and-so in a while, that's on me. Like I can't just be like, well, they haven't called me. It's like, yeah, well, I also haven't called them.
Yeah,
so
right,
I need to
right.
get off my high horse and call my friend and have a conversation with them, take them out to coffee, whatever the case may be. And so the whole scenario, especially as it comes to our context for our young adult ministry of Reach, it's been growing a lot. A year ago, we were hitting 60, 70 people, and now we're hitting like 80, 90, 100 sometimes on a Tuesday night. And so the friend groups are enlarging, but that means there's more interests and there's more nuances, and there's also just even more activities and opportunities that are going on. And you can't be at all of them. It's not healthy for you to be at every function ever. You just don't have time for that. So yeah, you're going to have some FOMO in that, but that's just part of growing up, is realizing that you your time is a resource and you can't be at every friend function that ever exists.
Yeah, I do want to caveat one thing about that, because I'm always sensitive to the person who takes what you just said wrong. Somebody out there is like, see, that's why I don't come to anything. It's like, oh, hold on. like, okay, you can't be
You're
at
not listening to
everything,
me.
but also some of you are not going to stuff for the opposite reasons, right? Instead of FOMO, you have social anxiety, or you have whatever, and it's like, quit making excuses. Get up and go to things. Plug into community, right? So there's a balance. You can't be at everything.
We've had a lot of conversations with people who are that way. They struggle with whatever sort of anxiety, and like, well, people don't really include me. It's like, how many invitations have you turned down?
Yeah.
And after a while, people stop inviting you because you've turned down 100 invitations.
Or even, I mean, honestly, being new to a space, you have to just go and plug in.
You gotta just
people
put yourself
will
out there.
snatch you up and start inviting you to stuff, but not when they never see you.
Yeah, they don't know that you want to play Far Cry 6 because you've never been around them to talk about it. Or whatever the case may be.
Right.
Whatever fantasy, whatever sports you want to do.
I mean, I have turned down several fantasy football invitations. People have finally stopped inviting me to do fantasy football leagues. I'm okay with that.
Yeah, I saw a pretty funny comedian. Complete side note. It was like, you know what men love? They love sports. You know what most of them can't do? They can't play sports. So they watch men play sports, and then they make up fantasy ideas about what it would be like to be in those sports. It's all made up. It's all make believe.
Right.
So, anyways, so as those friend groups grow, and that's something that, again, it's on you to grow. You can't say, well, so-and-so is not growing up. It's like, yeah, take this opportunity for you to grow. Get out of your comfort zone, reach out to people, make new friends, learn to be intentional. For me, I had the experience when I was a young adult. I moved when I had just turned 23 when I moved out of Oklahoma and went to New Orleans. And so I was forced into all new friend circles. And so I had to go through all of the things. I know a lot of the people in our young adult community, they're coming into Reach and into Evergreen completely fresh, not knowing anyone. And you just got to make yourself available and just be willing to go along with what your friends are doing. I really grew a lot through that season, and especially being able to put myself in opportunities for me to have great conversations sitting around over coffee really grew me as a young adult and as a disciple and disciple maker. And if you sit at home worrying about social anxiety, then you're missing out on opportunities to grow. Or if you're always the person that's trying to bring in the biggest group you possibly can, well, then you're also missing out on the opportunities of having smaller get-togethers. But if you're always like, I don't want to go to the big thing, well, you're missing out on opportunities of meeting other people. So in all of those areas, you can't just be a one-trick pony when it comes to making friends. You got to do a little of everything, because variety and community is healthy. And that's what we are stepping into as we come out of the world of being a high school student or even a college student, where your world is kind of dictated by what you are forced to be involved in. And now as a young adult, you get to make those choices. So let's make healthy choices. Let's make intentional, discerning choices, allowing the Spirit to move in and through your heart and in and through the relationships that God has sovereignly placed you around. Mm-hmm. So, yeah. What do you think,
That's
Bert?
Good. Yeah, I think just with, like, in regards to this question, with our community growing and building, like, there's so many opportunities for people to get plugged in and do things that they really enjoy with big groups or small groups. I mean, we have people that do board game nights, disc golf Saturdays.
All the time.
Like, there's so many opportunities, and so there's places for both of those size groups. And so I think that's all good. But question number 2, Matt, why is your hair so cool?
It's a blessing and a curse, really. I've always been overly concerned with my own hair, and so the funny story about it is when I started dating Kiva in college, I said I do not pay for haircuts, and you have to figure out how to cut my hair. And so she did, using office scissors in my dorm room, cut my hair. And did that a couple of times, and saw other, like, girls would walk through the hallway and be like, oh, Kiva knows how to cut hair. So then they started asking her to cut their hair, and then that turned into her career for the last 15 years. Before we moved, she went into cosmetology school because she has a knack for it. And so I'm able to have my own hairdresser in my house. What's funny was, I don't hide it. Some people be like, oh, are you ashamed of, like, the crazy hairstyles? Like, no, I was on point in all of the different versions of the different styles going on. I had crazy spikes when I was into punk rock in the year 2000. I had, a faux hawk down the back when I was into various pop punk things. I, like, all the way down, big faux hawk. And I had big emo swoop, and I'd flat iron my hair, when I was into emo and folk rock. And then one day in New Orleans, I was like, it is too humid. And I just quit flat ironing my hair. And then I grew super long, Jesus curls down to my shoulder blades, living in New Orleans. And, I just was whatever. My hair is always a thing.
You know how on the shampoo bottle it says, wash, rinse, or lather, rinse, repeat? Mm-hmm. His secret is he doesn't repeat.
Yeah, I don't. That's a new, You give me a decade, I'm going to, like, look super on point with that. If you want to see it, I also have a super cool picture of my dad in the 70s with, like, shoulder-to-shoulder man fro, because that's where I get my curly hair from. It is a sight to behold. It's pretty awesome. But that's why I was gifted that from my dad, the curly hair, and then I married a forced married hairstylist. Said, you will cut my hair. And she is doing a haircut right now at our house for a friend.
Amazing.
That's good.
Yeah.
Okay, question number 3. How should a believer wisely interact with the mental illness, medication, and the larger world of psychology?
Okay, here's my my answer for that, and we talk a lot about it. If you don't know, my wife is going to school for counseling, clinical mental health, so getting into that whole world of psychology and things of that nature. So she'll be a licensed counselor here in the next couple of years. But so how would a believer wisely interact with all of those things? Well, I believe that God has created us body, mind, and spirit. We're I believe, a trichotomous being. We're not just soul and body, but I believe also our mind, that God gives us our mind. And that is seen as we especially move into, even in the Old Testament, it's there. God wants us to reason with him, to test him, and to recognize the patterns of his faithfulness. So there is mind stuff going on in the Old Testament that God makes clear. But even in the New Testament, especially when Jesus in the Matthew, Mark, and Luke, it's brought up like, what's the greatest commandment? He adds in mind. Love the Lord God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. Part of that was he was speaking to a Greek Hellenistic culture where the idea of your emotions and thoughts in a ancient Hebrew culture was just in your gut. It was like in your bowels, you felt things, which we get that. When I'm thinking deeply or I'm nervous or whatever, we feel it in our gut. But then the idea of our mind kind of being separate from that started to come into play around Greek culture and Roman culture going forward, and that's where we are today, still thinking in that same way. And I believe that's true, that our mind and our heart and our soul, they're different things, and then also our body. So part of the way that God created us is also He intentionally created us as an embodied being. That's why in order for Him to come as the Messiah and rescue us, He had to become incarnate. He had to become an embodied being with us, with the same infirmities and proclivities that we have by being an embodied person, having hunger, having tiredness, having sadness, all those things that we feel in our bodies, in our bones. Christ also embodied that as well. And so how do we wisely interact with that? Well, our mental state and us trying to medicate the chemicals in our brains, that's only one part, I believe 1/3 of who God created us to be. And so thinking that that is a silver bullet and it's going to solve my problems with depression if I just take this pill, it's a losing game. That's not going to solve it. I think taking a pill to help regulate your chemicals in your mind gives you then the opportunity to then work on your heart and on your soul of getting yourself closer to God, of creating better habits in your life, so that way you don't need the crutch of the pill. But sometimes when a person is chemically imbalanced, it's hard for them to get to creating better habits and better ways of thinking in their spirit and in their soul, because they are bound up by the chemical imbalances in their mind. And so I think all of those things are healthy. And more often than not, it's just a change of habits that even gets you more chemically balanced. Eating better, sleeping better, those types of things will make you more chemically balanced. And sometimes someone needs a little bit of help, with, whatever, I don't know medical terms, but whatever the case may be, with like an anti-anxiety pill or whatever, that's fine, but that's not a permanent solution, and it's not a silver bullet. So that's how a believer would wisely do that. And a believer is going to wisely do anything in community, alongside other people. I'm not by myself. It's not just me getting medicated by a doctor and me trying to solve my own problems. I need other people's outside perspectives, their prayers for me, conversations I have with another person in order for me to get healthy, because I don't know what I don't know, and it's easier for somebody else on the outside, a close friend, to be able to see what's going on and speak truth into me in that situation.
Yeah, I think you're on, because I've had plenty of young adults come talk to me about taking medication or getting on medication, and it's like, okay, there's nothing wrong. Like, God has blessed us with medication. It's like, why would you take cold medication, or why would you take chemo for cancer? It's like, medication's a blessing, but I think the key is it's in conjunction with the bigger picture. It's like, if I had cancer, I would take chemotherapy and, more importantly, pray. If I have a cold, then I might ask God, Lord, I would love to be healed from this cold faster. And then take some Dayquil, and I think it's okay to, you have to recognize, like, there probably is something chemically going on, and also there's something spiritual going on. And the pill doesn't fix the spiritual side, but the spiritual side can fix the physical side. And so you have to do both, go in prayer and pray through even the decision to take the medication. Pray through what, the medication doing what it's supposed to do, not having negative effects, ultimately all truth is God's truth, including psychological truth, including medical truth, So if God made us smart enough to come up with certain medicines and medications and treatments, we should take advantage of them in conjunction with praying and honoring God, So I think you're dead on. Yeah.
You have any thoughts on that?
No, I think that's good. I think, remembering that God could use the medication as the means to your healing or whatever. And so it's just the spiritual side and the physical side, resting and relying on the Lord through that is the key. But
and it's not a lack of faith to try and take a pill. It's not a lack of faith that God has a plan for me when I put on my seatbelt. It's not a lack of faith when I've had a cold for a week and I'm finally not taking Dayquil for the last couple of days, but it's not a lack of faith for me to take Dayquil. Like, I want to feel better so I can think more clearly and operate better. And the same thing with a mental condition. If I can take this so I can feel better, so I can be more effective with my time by having better habits, by putting myself out there to be, going back to our first question about community, if someone is having a mental anxiety problem to where they're not able to be with community, then yeah, let's take the medication to kind of help ease your anxiety so you can then be in community, create healthy bonds, create healthy friendship, so then it's easier for you to step out unmedicated to be with your friends who now know you and love you because you have taken that step. And it's not a permanent crutch, it's just a temporary help to allow you to live life to the fullest that God wants us to live, walking in his spirit by faith.
Yeah,
so.
Exactly. Awesome. Okay. Last question. What's the deal with Catholics in believing that Mary was a perpetual virgin? What's the basis of that, and why does it matter to them that she is?
What's the deal with
What's
Catholics?
the deal with Catholics?
Is this a Jerry Seinfeld joke?
Yeah. So I think, first of all, you have to understand how Catholic theology is formed. The Catholics have, I can't remember where this phrase comes from, but it's basically the idea of a seed of a theology. And so with Catholics, if they have what they call a seed of a theology in a verse, so they find a verse and there's some truth that they can pull out of that theology, then the Pope, under his papal authority, where he can speak truth that's on par with Scripture, he can then extrapolate from that seed an entire doctrine. So that's where they get some doctrines that I think are what we would consider extra biblical.
Mm-hmm.
And I would say, like, there's not necessarily anything wrong with this doctrine. Like, as far as like a pitfall of it, it's not that
it's not going to send someone to hell.
Yeah, but the problem is, now I would argue if it's necessary for you, if Mary not being a perpetual virgin is like that's necessary to the gospel, then we got a different problem.
If you're placing your faith in Mary's perpetual virginity, then
we got a problem.
Yeah, then
but
you don't know the God of the Bible.
If this is just a theological stance that you take, I'm not trying to shoot at it. I think it's I actually would say that part of my answer to this question is that I don't necessarily see the benefit, right?
Mm-hmm.
But this gets into the whole, what it is a lot of the doctrines about Mary in the Catholic Church are to essentially have a higher respect for her,
mm-hmm.
To lift her up. And so this is, she's the mother of God. So because she's the mother of God, then these things must be true about her.
Mm-hmm.
And again, I don't think it's necessary. Mary was a normal person. Now, that doesn't mean we shouldn't hold her with high regard and respect, but she was just also a normal person who also needed to be saved and who needed, the blood of Christ, right?
Who got to participate in the Lord's will.
And,
mm-hmm.
and I think it is one of those things that becomes superfluous.
Mm-hmm.
And I would say for them, this is where you get into what's the difference between worship and veneration. John Calvin said it's a distinction without a difference. That, like, they'll tell you they don't worship Mary, they venerate her, and I got to be honest, I don't know that there's much difference there. To some extent, it's the same thing the Orthodox Church does. While I'm frustrating Catholics, well, let's frustrate some Orthodox Church people too. They do that with icons. They'll say, well, we don't worship the icons, we venerate them, and it's like. And I saw some people in Greece venerating icons in some ways I was real uncomfortable with, And again, even the point of the icons is so beautiful. It's so wonderful. It was a way to teach the gospel to people who were illiterate. It's fantastic.
Yeah.
But we can take things too far. And so there's nothing wrong with respecting Mary, lifting her up. There's ultimately nothing wrong with that doctrine.
Mm-hmm.
I just don't think that there's a lot of scriptural evidence for it, or that it provides a real big benefit on the back end of believing it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's when it comes to the more broad topic of icons and all that, there's an interesting thing about even ancient Hebrew history, like why is their art so minimal from think of like the Israelites in the desert and all that stuff, whereas we have art and things from other cultures from the contemporary time period that are, so many things that they created and these animals and those animals and all that stuff. Well, because they knew not to worship, or they knew they weren't supposed to worship any sort of graven image. And not that art is wrong. It's just, creating art for the sake of beauty and interest is fine, but humans so quickly get to the point to where they're more than just going, man, that's a really good painting, to where it's something worshipped in their eyes. And I think that's what we see with our Eastern Orthodox brothers and sisters, where the icons have been such a central role to their normal everyday theology and doctrine that they more than just venerate them and say, yeah, St. Paul, great. I believe, he did these things for the Lord, and I want to learn from him. That's why I read his works and all this other stuff. Yeah, great. But then they're, praying to St. Paul or whoever, and they're, donating and sacrificing things. It's just, you care more about that. Like, what's that doing for you?
Right.
In regards to St. Paul. Now, who are we called to, sacrifice things to, or give our time to? Well, the Lord. And what does that look like? How do we do that? Well, that's what fasting is. Me fasting and setting aside time and energy and my food for the day so I can spend time in prayer with the Lord. Like, that is worshiping the Lord. I don't even do that for a saint or for whoever. That doesn't make any sense. And so, because humans are so quick to overly focus on the object because it's something tangible that I can see. Now, going back to the question of Mary, and I feel like we've answered this more than once. We've had a lot of conversations about it. But one of the reasons that the arguments that comes up so much of thinking about why they think she should be something more than just an average human, because, well, how could she possibly carry Jesus, who is God-man, 100% God, 100% man, if she has any sort of sin? Mm-hmm. Well, my answer is to go to the rest of the Gospels and look at how Jesus interacts with humanity in general. When Jesus touches a leper, the leper's brokenness of his body does not infect Jesus, because Jesus is the God of the universe. He makes that person clean. Anyone that he interacts with, he makes them clean because he's the God of the universe. So Mary doesn't have to be sinless in order for him to be placed in her womb, for him to interact with her in that sort of way, because her sin is not going to rub off on him. Yeah. Just like the sin of the adulterous woman, the sin of the leper, the sin of whoever that Jesus interacts with in the Gospels, their brokenness, body, mind, and spirit, does not rub off on him. Yeah. His power and majesty and holiness rubs off on them in a way that is life-changing for them. Yeah. So in that regard, Mary was special. God venerated her in that moment. Be like, hey, Mary, like, you're chosen. Like, you're great. Your heart is in the right place. And so her interaction with her does make her special in that regard, but it doesn't make her in any sort of way supernatural that's anything different than who I am as a human.
And obviously you're touching on more than just the perpetual virgin part of this. You're also touching on Mary's sinlessness. That's the other conversation we've had more deeply, was Mary sinless? And again, I think that actually does start to have a negative effect on the gospel, because Paul says there's no one righteous, no, not one. Jesus stands alone there. Yeah. And, it's just kind of it doesn't benefit us to necessarily hold those beliefs. Yeah. And again, even that, like, where did that doctrine come from? Go look it up. It starts because they were trying to figure out how Jesus could be born and not, in his DNA have received original sin. And it's like, well, turns out that's not the best argument for how original sin is passed on. Yeah. You know what I mean?
We just talked about that, I think, in the last episode about where does original sin come from, and that is the idea of passing on my identity as a father, passing that on to my sons, the heir of my estate. And just like when I adopt someone in, now they're an heir of my estate as well. And so Jesus, having the Lord of the universe as his father, he was not inheriting the inheritance of sin. He kept his inheritance of being the creator of all things.
But again, if you're in a period of time, medieval Europe, where they think, oh, it's physical, it's passed on with the actual DNA, the seed of the man and the egg of the woman. And well, okay, now we got to figure out how Jesus could have been born of a woman without physically inheriting sin. And it's like, okay, the answer makes sense in that moment in time, being the best answer they could come up with.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean we have to then look into Scripture and go, that's the only.
Yeah.
It's like I actually
force it in there,
think there's a lot less evidence for that being the case. But just interesting.
Yeah.
Again, this is where I was joking before the podcast. These are the questions that people get sensitive about, and the reality is, hear us when we say we're not. If you want to hold to these beliefs, like again, I think that they cannot be essential for your salvation. You might be in trouble then. Like you might be believing on something extra. Okay. But if you think these doctrines are true, we can disagree on doctrines. Like we can disagree on theology. There's a bar, and above that bar is the things that are essential to the faith. And below that bar, we can disagree all day.
Yeah.
And this, for me, it's below the bar.
That's why we have community with our Protestant brothers and sisters who do baptism differently than we do, because we don't believe baptism is essential for salvation.
I'm not throwing out the Presbyterians or the Methodists. It's like we have a difference of opinion on something that is ultimately below the bar. That's also why it's okay for different denominations to exist. Go worship in accordance with your conviction. If you're convicted that something is true, go work. That's actually why a lot of churches split over baptism, because people in those churches were like, convicted that this isn't right about baptism, so they left. Great, that should happen. We shouldn't leave in animosity, but it's okay for you to say, you know what, I actually think that this doctrinal belief is essential, not essential, important for my worship. So I'm going to go worship with the congregation that has that belief. Fine, that's great.
And a note to wrap up on all that too. One of the things I've been studying lately is the way that. What does Christ say? How does the world know that we belong to him? It's how we love each other.
Yes.
And so it's wrong when someone disagrees with my theology to break fellowship with me and then, also fire arrows at me as they're leaving. Like that's the way the world acts.
Yeah, that's exactly how the world acts.
And so if we don't do that, if we can show, hey, you and I disagree with a thing, and it's a thing that we think is very important, but you know what? We're still buddies. We're going to still get coffee together, whatever. And then the world's like, hey, but you guys disagree. It's like, yeah, but we still love Jesus and we still love each other. And so we don't have to agree on everything to be friends.
Yeah.
That stands in opposition. It's countercultural to the way human nature acts, to the way that the world acts. And the world will know us by how we love the brotherhood, including that's why we don't want to just dump on the Catholics and the Eastern Orthodox or whatever. It's because there's some things about their theology, like the way that they do pay attention to the icons and to all the great cloud of witnesses. That's why Orthodox churches have domes and they paintings, all the things up there to remind you, hey, you're on the shoulders of giants. There's people that have gone before you, and that's something that we miss out on as Baptists, Protestants in the middle of America.
Yeah.
Because that's not a part of our culture. And it's something that we have to then intentionally try and learn from them and remember the shoulders of the giants that we stand on.
I walked into an Orthodox church in Greece that had on the ceiling in the first room painted just pictures of martyrs, dozens and dozens of pictures of martyrs, and then the second room was for worship. But in the first room, they said this room is to count the cost, and it's like I could stay in this room for hours just praying and meditating and looking at these pictures and thinking about who came before me in the faith for it to get to this point. That's wonderful. That's such a great thing.
Yeah.
That's
why we don't want to dump on them and fire arrows at them, because
tremendous
I disagree
respect.
with certain things, but man, there's some things that they do in their worship that's absolutely beautiful, and I would love to recapture that from my own heart. That's why we encourage people to go pick up a book of an ancient dead guy and learn to love the Lord the way that he learned to love the Lord.
Yeah. We should link that new What It Means to Be Protestant, that book.
Oh yeah.
We should link that book today with this episode.
Okay, yeah.
So
we'll do that. I haven't read it yet. It's on my to-do list. You read it?
No, I just got it.
Oh, okay.
But I think it would be worth just
Pastor
based on
Michael's
the
been talking about it.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's good. That's a good idea. Any thoughts on that, Mr.
No.
Burt?
I think this has been a great conversation. So thanks for joining us on this conversation for That's Reach podcast, and we'll see you next time.
Yeah, buddy.
Thanks for joining us on That's a Reach. We are pastors and leaders from the Reach Young Adult Ministry at Evergreen Church in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and these questions come from those in our young adult community here. If you're from a different church and context, we hope you found the discussion beneficial and edifying as you pursue spreading the gospel of Jesus Christ in your culture and context.
Pat, Papa, Pat, Patio, Potato.